They called him foolish, not cruel, not wicked, just foolish. His robes were always a little crooked. His chants never quite aligned with the rest. And when he spoke, there was something rough in the way he said things, not mean-spirited, just misplaced, like a bell rung too early at dawn. This was Pilindavacha. He didn't arrive on the path with wisdom spilling from his lips. He wasn't eloquent. He wasn't sharp. He wasn't who people expected when they pictured a disciple of the Buddha, but he showed up every morning, sweeping the monastery steps before anyone else stirred, folding robes with care, even if his own always slipped loose again, picking up fallen leaves, returning borrowed bowls, bowing just a little too long. The other monks whispered sometimes, kind whispers, but still the kind that land on your skin like light rain that won't dry. Good-hearted, yes, but slow. He means well, not quite there yet. And maybe you've felt that too. Maybe there's a part of you that's never been quite right in the eyes of others. You try sincerely, but something about your way of moving through the world doesn't match the script. You speak and people blink. You work and it goes unnoticed. You love and somehow it arrives bent or late. Pilindavacha would understand because he stayed, not to prove them wrong, but because this path felt true beneath his feet, even if it took him longer, even if it didn't come naturally. He stayed, and that staying became its own form of wisdom. He would rise with the dark and sweep not for praise, but because the leaves were there. He would offer water before anyone asked. He would listen more than he spoke, and when he did speak, his words still tripped, but his eyes were kind. The Buddha saw him, not for what others said, but for what he was cultivating day after quiet day. And so one morning, when the other monks laughed gently over his latest chanting misstep, the Buddha turned to them and said, "Don't mistake his manners for his heart." Silence fell like a blanket, and Pilindavacha bowed not to hide, but because humility was his home. You sit now in your own quiet space, maybe in a room dim with moonlight, or beneath a fan's soft hum. And in this stillness you wonder, what if the slowest among us are not behind, but rooted? What if understanding takes time, and time is not a flaw? What if your softness, your confusion, your trembling voice are not barriers, but the very doorway to awakening? Tonight there's no lesson to master, no verse to chant perfectly, only this, that you are allowed to grow at your own pace, that you are allowed to stay on the path even if you stumble, that you are allowed to belong even now, even here, even as you are. Pilindavacha did not blaze like a comet. He was more like the moss on an old stone, slow to appear but impossible to shake once it took hold. And so are you. You lie back. You breathe. You let the noise of what they said or what you feared they thought dissolve like mist. The breath returns. The silence holds you, and somewhere in that ancient forest of gentle-hearted monks, Pilindavacha keeps sweeping not to be seen, not to impress, but simply because the path is the path, and he loves it. And now maybe you sweep a little inside your own heart, not to fix it, just to make space for quiet. The leaves you gather may not be seen by anyone. The stillness you offer may never be praised, but the Buddha sees, and that is enough. You are enough. You always were. They say a sharp voice means a sharp mind, But what if your voice never matched the softness inside? Pilindavaka's words often came out like bark, stripped from a tree, rough edge splintered hard to hold. He didn't mean to sound harsh, it just came out that way. And so they labeled him again. But beneath that voice, if you listened closely, was something else. A pause before speaking, a glance to see if his words landed, a frown of regret when they didn't. Not everyone noticed, but the Buddha did. Once a young novice cried after Pilindavacha corrected him. His tone had been sharp, not cruel, just too firm for tender ears. The boy ran off. Pilindavacha sat down under the Bodhi tree alone that evening, eyes fixed on the soil. He didn't chase the boy. He didn't justify himself. He simply waited not for the novice, but for understanding. The moon climbed, the silence deepened, and still he sat listening to his own breath, rough like sand over stone. He placed one hand on his chest, felt the drumbeat of remorse, and let it be. A voice, after all, is only one way the heart speaks. He thought about how trees speak and rustle, and birds and flicker, how silence too can soothe. And in the hush of that night, he realized he could learn to speak again, not from his throat, but from stillness. So he began to bow before he spoke. He began to offer water before offering words. He began to let others speak first, and only answered when their eyes asked him to. And slowly, something shifted, not in his voice. It still cracked and stumbled like a stone in a stream, but in the way people listened. They no longer feared him. They leaned in, not because he had grown smoother, but because he had grown truer. You think about your own voice now, the time you said too much, the time your tone betrayed the gentleness you meant, the apology that caught in your throat. It's all right. Even the Buddha's disciples were human, sometimes raw, sometimes clumsy, always becoming. And you are becoming too. You lie still and remember the feeling of speaking with regret, maybe to someone you love, maybe to yourself. Let it soften now. Let it unravel like the knot of a robe, untied at day's end. There is no need to punish the voice. Just listen deeper. Beneath your words there is intention. Beneath your intention there is tenderness. Pilindavacha was never known for eloquence, but he was known in time for compassion, the kind that arrives not with grand gestures, but with steady offerings, a bowl of water, a gentle silence, a space made wide enough for others to sit. Sometimes he still slipped. His tone would flare like dry leaves catching fire. But now he noticed, now he returned. And always he tried again with the same crooked robe, the same bowed head. The Buddha once said, "It is not the words, but the heart behind them that makes them true." You take a breath now. Let it come in gently like a breeze, entering a quiet room. Let it leave just as gently like a bell fading after the strike. You do not need to be polished tonight. You do not need the perfect tone. You only need the willingness to return to the quiet, to the breath, to that place beneath the voice where love still waits to be spoken again. And perhaps as you drift, you feel it that even a rough voice can carry a gentle heart, and yours always has. They often said he was the last to understand. When the Buddha gave a teaching, others would nod in graceful rhythm, as though the words poured straight into their understanding, like water into polished bowls. Pilindavacha, on the other hand, tilted his head, furrowed his brow, and blinked in confusion. It wasn't that he didn't try. He listened deeply. He just needed more time. His thoughts moved like oxen, steady but slow, carrying the weight of sincerity across the fields of effort. But though he may have been late to grasp the meaning, he was always the first to act with care. Before the first bird call, before the sunrise painted gold on the temple walls, Pilindavacha was awake. Not in meditation, not reciting long verses, but sweeping, always sweeping. The leaves never seemed to end, yet he never complained. Some monks sought insight through debate, others through solitude. Pilindavacha sought it through action, not to impress, but to embody. And maybe you too have felt like the slow one in the room, like your insights bloom after others have gone quiet. But look again. Perhaps your hands have always known the way, even before the mind caught up. He cleaned the meditation hall before the others arrived. He folded robes that weren't his. He gave up the shady spots and carried the old monk's bowl without being asked. And when questioned, he simply said, "I cannot recite like the others, but I can hold a broom, so I sweep." Sometimes, what looks like slowness is simply another way of knowing. He once spent a full afternoon mending a sandal strap for a novice too embarrassed to ask for help. The thread was crooked, the knots were bulky, but the strap held, and the novice who once rolled his eyes at Pilindavacha's chanting bowed a little deeper that night in thanks. Not all teachings arrive in words. Some arrive in footsteps on dew. Some arrive in the way a bowl is washed. Some arrive in the warmth of a place left clean for someone else. The Buddha saw this. He once said to the Sangha, "There are those who understand slowly and walk quickly, and there are those who understand quickly but remain still. It is not how fast one learns, but how faithfully one practices. You breathe now and think of the places you once felt behind, in school, in friendship, in healing. But was your pace truly a flaw, or was it simply the rhythm of your becoming? You let the thoughts settle like dust in a beam of afternoon light. Not everything must be rushed. Pilindavacha never led a sermon, never dazzled with insight. But when the Buddha passed, the novice who wept first went to Pilindavacha, not for answers, but for steadiness. And Pilindavacha said nothing. He simply sat beside him, one hand resting on the boy's shoulder, the other holding the old broom. That night, he swept until the stars came out. You do not need to arrive quickly. You do not need to shine brightly. You need only to rise each morning with kindness and sleep each night with stillness. Like Pilindavacha, slow, steady, and entirely true. There are trees that flower early. Their blossoms are fragrant, their colors bold, and all who pass stop to admire them. And then there are trees like Pilindavacha. You don't notice them at first. Their bark is plain. Their leaves are sparse. They do not bloom when others do. But underground their roots run deep quietly, drinking from the soil, anchoring the earth with unseen strength. Pilindavacha's merit was like that. He never sought recognition. In fact, when praised, he would often bow his head and walk away not from humility alone, but from disbelief. He couldn't see what others were beginning to glimpse, but the Buddha could. There was a day when the Sangha received offerings, robes, food garlands, incense. The wealth of devotion spread like spring across the monastery grounds. And yet, when the Buddha was asked which monk was most worthy that day, he turned toward Pilindavacha and smiled, not for his chanting, not for his speech, but for the merit he carried like water in a deep, unseen well. Merit in the teachings is not measured by applause. It is measured in intention, in the quiet choices, in the steady efforts no one claps for. Pilindavacha once gave his only blanket to a wandering stranger. He never mentioned it, only shivered quietly for 2 nights before another monk noticed and offered his own. He once spent a full week washing the robes of an elder who had fallen ill not because he was asked, but because he saw they were stained. He said nothing, just washed and folded and placed them gently at the elder's door each morning. No one counted those acts, but they counted. The roots of a tree are never seen, but they are what hold the entire forest in place. And so it is with you. You've done things no one knew, stayed kind when it was hardest, carried burdens that didn't belong to you, just to make the way easier for someone else. You may not have medals or titles or an audience, but you've planted seeds with your breath, your choices, your stillness. And those seeds are sprouting even now, even if your eyes are closed. There was a time when Pilindavacha sat in meditation for many hours, eyes half lowered, hands still. A bee landed on his robe. He did not flinch. Later, a young monk asked, "Were you not disturbed?" And Pilindavacha replied, "He was gentle. And I am not the center of the world. Even now that line floats across the centuries, like incense smoke. I am not the center of the world, but I can nourish it. So can you. You breathe now soft and deep. You feel your spine sink into the surface beneath you. You imagine roots unfurling from your body, not literal ones, but the quiet presence of your practice winding into the ground of your life. You are not late. You are not lesser. You are simply growing underground. And one day, without warning, a single bloom may rise from the quiet soil of your heart, not for show, not for praise, but because you loved this world enough to stay rooted, like Pilindavacha. Pilindavacha was not quick with words, nor fluid with verse. He did not memorize easily. He often forgot entire lines of the Buddha's teachings, confusing stanzas, or reciting them out of order. But his body remembered. It remembered how to bow in sincerity, even when he didn't know what words to offer. It remembered how to wait at the well until the last monk had drawn water. It remembered the motion of sweeping left to right, right to left, not to finish, but to be present. When teachings were spoken, others listened with their ears. Pilindavacha listened with his hands. He learned compassion through lifting, offering, preparing. He learned patience through washing bowls that weren't his. He learned concentration by sweeping sand so slowly that the wind gave up trying to undo his work. Not every student learns through words. Some of us, maybe you too, learn by doing, by sensing, by moving, by placing one stone after another in quiet arrangement, like building a small shrine from what the world has left behind. One day, the Buddha offered a teaching on non-attachment. The monks sat beneath the trees, nodding as his words washed over them like gentle rain. Pilindavacha sat too. He tried to focus. He really did. But the words floated past too fast, like wind through a cracked door. So later that evening, as the sun lowered, he took a small clay cup, filled it with water, and held it. Then he tipped it slightly. A few drops spilled. Then he tipped it more, and more water spilled, until the cup was empty, and yet it had not broken. He smiled. His body understood now. Letting go did not mean losing everything. It meant pouring gently. It meant allowing. And so he bowed. That was how he learned, not by reciting, but by feeling. And this too is a valid path. Maybe you've judged yourself for not grasping teachings quickly. Maybe you've felt behind in practice, in insight, in peace. But the body has its own wisdom. It understands when to rest. It remembers how to breathe even when you forget. It knows when something feels right and when it does not. So tonight, let your body be your teacher. Feel the ground beneath you. Notice the warmth in your hands, the rise and fall of your belly, the breath moving like water in and out of the shore of your ribs. These are teachings too. Pilindavaka once told a novice, "When you forget the words, remember the gesture. The truth lives there too." And what are your gestures? The way you pause before speaking, the way you tidy a room for someone you love, the way you wrap your arms around yourself when the world feels sharp. All of these are the body's prayers. You are practicing even when you don't realize it. Even now, lying still in this soft silence, your body is remembering how to be kind, how to relax, how to remain. There is no need to force understanding. It will come, not all at once, but slowly, like steam rising from tea, like a stone warming in the sun, like the muscle of the heart, learning again and again how to hold and release and hold again. Pilindavacha may not have remembered every sutra, but he remembered how to carry water without spilling. And sometimes that is enough. You are enough. Some monks glowed when seen. Their voices rose in rhythm. Their eyes shone when praised. Their kindness was real, but also noticed. Pilindavaka's kindness lived in the shadows. He did not wait to be seen. In fact, he often chose the hour just before dawn, when the world still lay between dream and waking to carry out his gentlest acts. He placed fresh water at the novice's bedside before they rose. He picked fallen flowers and tucked them near shrines. He patched robes with thread too coarse to look pretty, but strong enough to hold. One time, he mended a sandal strap left broken outside the latrine. No one knew who did it. But the next day, a monk who had been limping smiled as he walked. No one applauded. Pilindavacha didn't need them to. That was the magic. His kindness did not demand a stage. It bloomed like a lotus underwater, hidden from view, yet complete. And sometimes, kindness is strongest when it asks for nothing in return. Once during a particularly dry season, the communal well was nearly empty. Tension crept into the monastery. Small things became heavy voices clipped. Pilindavacha began waking earlier still. He walked farther into the forest to a spring known only to the deer. There he filled 2 pots, carried them back, set them beside the kitchen fire. He said nothing, but those who noticed began to soften. The cook added more lentils to the pot. The elders nodded a little deeper in greeting. The novice who once mocked Pilindavacha's stutter began to follow him in silence, watching his steps. The Buddha, seeing this ripple, said one evening, "Kindness when unseen waters the driest heart. You think now of the times you were kind and no one saw, when you left food at someone's door, when you forgave without telling them, when you offered warmth with no expectation. Those moments are not wasted. In the sutras, it is said that the seeds planted by quiet compassion sprout not in this life alone, but in the heart stream of lifetimes. And in your breath, even now, you carry the scent of those blossoms. So breathe it in. The air that passes through you has passed through trees that grew in solitude, through flowers that bloomed on cliffs no one climbed. Not all beauty needs an audience. Not all goodness needs applause. Sometimes the merit is the act itself, the open hand, the bowed head, the task done gently when no one is watching. Pilandavacha understood this. He once spent an entire afternoon repairing the straw mats in the meditation hall. He worked in the heat until his robe clung to his skin. When the monks arrived later, they found the space cool, clean, and peaceful. No one asked who had done it. No one needed to. The space itself had absorbed the offering, and in return, it held them. So tonight, as you lie still beneath your own sky, you remember your presence too is an offering. Your silence too is a prayer. You do not need to be praised to be worthy. You only need to keep placing one act of kindness into the world again and again, like placing cups of water beside sleeping friends. No thanks needed, just faith that it matters, and it does. There was once a novice who asked Pilindavacha Venerable, "Do you ever feel like giving up?" Pilindavacha smiled slow and tired. "Yes," he said, "almost every day. But then I remember the thread." The novice blinked. "What thread?" Pilindavacha held up two fingers close together. "The one that connects my heart to the path." It was not grand wisdom. It was not a teaching filled with metaphors of fire or thunder or stars. It was just a thread, a small fraying one, but it never broke. He said that some mornings he rose feeling empty, that some chance stayed stubbornly tangled in his memory, that sometimes other monks' brightness made him feel dull. But then he would touch the floor with his forehead, and in that moment of contact, stone to skin, breath to earth, the thread would pull gently. And so he stayed, not because he felt worthy, not because he was strong, but because the thread reminded him, keep going. You think of your own thread now. Maybe it feels thin. Maybe you wonder if it's even there at all. But close your eyes for a moment. Listen. Can you feel the pull? It's not dramatic. It doesn't demand. It simply whispers, stay. Stay with the breath. Stay with the silence. Stay with the part of you that hasn't given up. Pilindavaka once told the Buddha, "I do not shine like the others." And the Buddha said, "Not all stars burn the same way. Some glow inside where eyes cannot see." You breathe that in, a quiet kind of light, not one that blinds, but one that warms. There were times Pilindavacha left the meditation hall early, not from laziness, but from pain. The ache in his knees, the tiredness in his spine. He never complained. He simply rose, bowed low, and stepped into the garden to continue in stillness standing. The thread pulled, even as others sat, even as doubt crept in, even when he couldn't feel enlightened at all. The path, he once said, is not always a wide road. Sometimes it narrows until it's no more than a thread, and still you follow, because it's yours, because it brought you this far, because it has never snapped, not even once. So tonight, let yourself find that thread again. Maybe it's in the breath you just took slow and unnoticed. Maybe it's in the kindness you offered earlier without realizing. Maybe it's in the quiet decision to stay present even now, even in the dark. Threads do not shout, they do not shine, but they hold, and they guide, and they connect you to something older than your struggle and deeper than your doubt. Pilindavacha would say, even when I stumble, I fall forward. Even when he faltered, he bowed. Even when he forgot the words, he showed up. And this was his thread, not perfection, not brilliance, but returning again and again and again. So if you feel frayed tonight, soft and unraveling, do not fear. That thread is still there, between your breath and your body, between your heart and the truth you've always known, between this moment and the next, soft as it may be. Hold it gently. You are not lost, just walking the part of the path that is harder to see. In the monastery, each monk carried a bowl, simple, unadorned, fired clay or iron, not a symbol of pride, but of humility. Pilindavaka's bowl was cracked. No one knew when it happened, perhaps from age or from a fall, but the crack ran from rim to base, thin but visible. Other monks replaced theirs when they chipped, but Pilindavacha kept his. Each morning he cradled it with both hands, careful and precise, as if holding something fragile and holy. It reminds me, he once whispered, that I am not whole, and still I am useful. The novices thought this strange. Why cling to something imperfect? But over time, they noticed his bowl never spilled. His offerings, no matter how small, were always received with reverence, and they began to wonder, perhaps it wasn't the bowl's perfection that made it worthy, but the way he carried it. One day, a strong wind knocked the bowls off their resting shelf. Several shattered. The monks cried out, rushing to inspect the damage. Pilindavacha's cracked bowl lay among the broken ones, but it had not split further. He picked it up, brushed it off, and bowed. When asked why he hadn't replaced it, he said gently, "It has learned how to hold." There is something about a vessel that's been tested, that knows its limits, that carries with care because it must. You too have cracks, not flaws, not failures, just tender lines that mark where the world touched you too roughly. And still you hold. You carry meals to loved ones. You hold grief without spilling it on others. You gather moments of peace into the bowl of your day, even if they are few and fleeting. Pilindavaka once helped a novice with trembling hands carry his bowl. They walked together slowly. Halfway through, the novice whispered, "I'll drop it." Pilindavacha replied, "Then let us drop it together and pick it up again." The bowl never fell. Sometimes it is not the strength of the vessel, but the steadiness of the hands beside you. Tonight you rest, but still you carry. You carry stories. You carry silence. You carry the quiet ache of trying. And like Pilindavacha's bowl, your presence is not diminished by its cracks, it is deepened. The light enters through those lines. The compassion seeps through those old breaks. And when others see you really see you, they don't notice the crack. They notice the way you hold, with tenderness, with patience, with care. So as you lie here, hands resting gently, imagine you are holding a bowl, not outside you, but within. A space in your heart that is both weathered and whole. Feel it steady. Feel it settle. You do not have to be perfect to be of service. You only have to be willing to hold gently what life places in your hands. And when it trembles, just breathe and carry on. In the monastery, the bell rang often. It rang for waking, for meals, for chanting, for meditation. Its sound cut through silence like a bird's cry at dawn, clear, bright, impossible to ignore. But Pilindavacha listened not only to the bell, he listened to the space between, that hush, that breath, that echo fading into stillness. It was there he believed that the teaching lived. The bell reminds, he once said, but the silence teaches. He would linger after others moved, remain seated while robes rustled and feet hurried off. Just for a moment more, just to feel what came after, because it was easy to follow a sound, harder to stay with its vanishing, like staying with grief after the loss, like staying with joy after the laughter fades. To stay even when the sound is gone, that was where insight grew. There was a day when a new bell was hung, shinier, louder, with a voice that rang long into the trees. The monks praised it. Pilindavacha simply nodded. But after the first few days, he returned to a spot by the garden, a place far enough away that the bell's voice came as a whisper, not a shout. Too close, he said gently, and the mind runs toward it. Just far enough, and it must lean in. He wasn't being poetic. He meant it. He believed the space between each bell chime held more teaching than the sound itself. The pause was where the mind had a chance to land, to soften, to return. You think now of your own life, the meetings, the alarms, the messages, the sounds that tug your attention one way then the next. But what lives between them? The moment before you answer the phone, the quiet after you finish a task, the stillness between the question and your reply. Those are bells too, not the clanging kind, but the kind that open a door and invite you to step through just for a breath. Pilindavaka once invited a novice to sit not during meditation, but between it. Notice what remains, he said, when the ritual ends. What remained was wind, the sound of sandals, a bird hopping across stone, and a heartbeat not loud, not sacred, just present. It's easy to overlook this quiet, to rush from one bell to the next. But tonight, as you lie still, there is no next bell. No one is calling you. This is the space between. You are in it now, not doing, not reaching, just noticing. Pilindavacha called this the second silence. The first silence comes from absence, the stopping of noise. But the second comes from awareness, the deep noticing of what remains. Let yourself listen to that now, to the sound of your breath echoing in the chamber of your chest, to the rhythm of air through your nose, to the quietness beneath even these words. There is a temple inside you. The bells are not always rung aloud. Sometimes they ring in your body, in the stillness after a sigh, in the weight of your limbs growing heavier with rest, in the pause between one thought and the next. Pilindavacha once said, "You can't force silence, but you can arrive in it." And you have, right here, between the bells, where nothing asks of you except that you rest. Pilindavacha loved walking the outer paths of the monastery quiet trails that edged the forest, where the grasses whispered and wild flowers leaned in with soft curiosity. One day, a novice watched him pause beside a pale blossom growing at the edge of the path. The wind stirred it gently, and it swayed as though nodding to him. He bent toward it, eyes kind hands behind his back, but he did not pluck it. Later, the novice asked why. It was already doing its work, Pilindavacha said. I didn't need to possess it to appreciate it. That became his way to admire, without needing to own to bless, without needing to alter. In a world where beauty often becomes a thing to collect or claim, his restraint was its own kind of reverence. He knew that not everything beautiful is meant to be touched. Some things are meant to be seen, honored, and left to bloom. Pilindavacha would return to that same spot often, not to see if the flower was still there, but simply because that place had become sacred in his memory, not for what he took from it, but for what he left behind. You've had moments like this too, haven't you? Where something struck you as so perfect in its stillness that to interfere felt like breaking a spell. A sunrise too quiet to photograph, a smile from a stranger that asked for nothing, a sentence in a book you never underlined because you didn't want to trap it. There is a wisdom in leaving things as they are, not out of neglect, but out of deep respect. Pilindavacha once said, "Love is not always doing. Sometimes it is simply not interrupting." He told a story of a deer he once saw on his morning walk. It was drinking from the stream ears, twitching hooves half in the water. He could have called to it, tried to edge closer, made a sound, but he stayed still silent as the stones and the deer drank peacefully. To touch it, he said, would have been to steal something sacred, the trust of the moment. In your own life, how often have you tried to hold too tightly? To label an experience, capture it, explain it, own it, and how often has it slipped through your fingers, not out of malice, but because beauty is meant to pass through, not to be possessed. Tonight you are not asked to hold anything, only to witness, only to breathe with what is. Pilindavacha would say, "Let the flower be the flower. Let the breath be the breath." There was a time a novice brought him a bouquet picked fresh from the hillside. The boy beamed proud. Pilindavacha smiled, gently accepted the gift with grace, and placed it on the altar. But the next day the flowers drooped, and he whispered, "Better to bow to the living than to decorate with the dying." The novice understood. The next day he brought nothing, just sat beside Pilindavacha on the stone path, watching the meadow sway, and it was enough. So now, as your own thoughts drift like petals on a breeze, you don't have to catch them. You don't have to name every feeling or chase every image. You can let them bloom and fade. You can let them be. Some beauty is meant to move through you, like wind through grass, without clinging, without grasping. Pilindavacha once said, to walk past a flower and leave it standing, that too is a form of mindfulness. And so tonight, in your stillness, you walk past many thoughts, many feelings. You bow to each one, but you do not pluck. You let them be what they are, passing perfect, untouched. And in that you too bloom. One morning during alms round chanting, Pilindavacha forgot the words. The line came to him blank, not a whisper, not a syllable, just silence. A few heads turned, a few brows furrowed, but he didn't stumble to recover. He didn't rush. He simply bowed his head and remained quiet. Later, a younger monk asked, "Weren't you embarrassed?" Pilindavacha smiled. "Only if I believed the words mattered more than the silence." He explained gently that sometimes silence is not the absence of devotion, but its truest form. The Buddha once taught that stillness is the highest speech. Pilindavacha took that to heart. When he couldn't speak, he listened. When he forgot, he remembered to be present. Not every offering must be made of sound. Some come wrapped in silence, placed at the feet of the moment like incense. He said there was once a time years earlier when he knew every line by heart, but he recited with pride, not presence. His voice rang clear, but his mind wandered. And so the day he forgot, completely suddenly, was the day he truly chanted, not with his mouth, but with his whole body. with his bowed head, with his open palms, with the breath he took instead of a word. You've forgotten things too, important things, names that once mattered, places that once shaped you, words you meant to say but couldn't find in time. And maybe you've judged yourself for it. But Pilindavacha would remind you forgetting is not failure. It is space. It is the pause before the next breath. It is the gap into which awareness enters. That morning, his silence didn't break the chant. It deepened it. It reminded others to slow, to soften, to let the words mean something again. Sometimes we say too much. Sometimes the mouth moves faster than the heart. But silence returns us to sincerity. He once shared a memory of sitting beneath the Bodhi tree, not the Bodhi tree, but a quiet fig tree by the edge of the temple grounds. He sat there one evening and tried to recite a teaching from memory. The words came halfway and then dissolved. He let them go, and in their place came wind, the low breath of leaves rustling overhead, a bird calling twice, then falling quiet, his own heartbeat patient and slow. He realized then that the Dharma wasn't only in the chanting, it was in the waiting, it was in the listening, it was in the stillness that made room for what was not just what had been said before. So tonight, as you rest here, if you forget something, a task, a line, a word, bless the forgetting. See it as space. See it as return. You don't always have to know the next thing. Sometimes, the kindest act is to simply be with the not knowing. Pilindavacha would close his eyes, hands folded, lips still, and that was enough, because devotion does not always speak. Sometimes it bows. Sometimes it listens. Sometimes it forgets the chant, but remembers the silence. You breathe in that memory now. You let your body be the vessel of reverence, not through sound, but through surrender, through stillness, through presence. Not every truth must be spoken. Not every prayer must have words. Let the silence tonight be your offering. Let it rise around you like mist on the hillside, soft and sacred. Let it remind you that forgetting is not falling. It is just another form of returning. And in that return, you find what matters, not the sound, but the stillness beneath it. There's a particular kind of forgetting that doesn't feel like failure. It feels like falling into something deeper. Pilindavacha sat beneath the sela tree one late afternoon, a soft wind curling through the long grass, the light beginning to turn gold. He was meant to recite a gatha, one he had repeated for years. He began softly. His lips moved in rhythm with his breath. The words came slowly, haltingly. But then something unexpected happened. Halfway through, the words disappeared. Not in panic, not in confusion, just gone. A sudden emptiness where the chant had lived. He paused, waited, tried to recall the line, but nothing came. And so he sat, not grasping, not fidgeting, just sitting. You might expect frustration, shame maybe, embarrassment. But Pilindavacha only let the silence stretch like fabric drying in the breeze. And in that silence, something profound opened. He had spent years chasing words, trying to get the verses right, trying to hold the teachings perfectly in his mind, trying to belong through knowledge. But in that moment of forgetting, something else held him, a deeper stillness. The silence was not empty. It was full of breath, full of the scent of fallen blossoms, full of awareness untouched by language. He later told a fellow monk, in that moment, I understood more than any chant had ever taught me, because the words are not the teaching, The teaching is what remains when the words fall away. You've experienced this too, haven't you? A moment when the mind goes blank, and instead of panic, there's peace. A moment when the structure dissolves, and what's left is presence. Pure, unfiltered, undemanding. It doesn't always feel grand. Sometimes it's as small as watching steam rise from a cup of tea, or hearing the breath of someone sleeping beside you, or sitting like now in the hush of your own company. And maybe you've judged yourself for forgetting, for not recalling what you learned, for not being able to explain what you feel, for fumbling the words, for letting silence stretch too long. But perhaps like Pilindavaka, that forgetting was not a lapse. Perhaps it was an arrival. The Buddha once said that words are like a raft meant to carry you across, but not to be carried on your back once the river is crossed. Pilindavacha didn't cross all rivers in his lifetime, but he began to let go of the raft. He began to trust the current. That day beneath the sala tree the breeze kept blowing. The sun dipped lower. He didn't try again to remember the gatha. He didn't frown. He didn't apologize. He just breathed. And later, when the Buddha passed by and asked what he had been practicing, Pilindavacha bowed and said, "I forgot the words today." The Buddha paused, smiled gently, and said, "And what did you remember?" Pilindavacha touched his chest. Stillness. And the Buddha nodded. Then the teaching was not lost. You let that soak in now like sunlight, warming your shoulders through a window. Stillness is not what happens when everything goes right. Stillness is what remains when everything else has fallen away. Even the teachings, even the goals, even the self that keeps trying to get it all right. You breathe more deeply now, not because you're trying to, but because something inside you is loosening. The pressure to know, to recite, to explain, to prove, gone, and in its place quiet. Not emptiness, not absence, but the kind of quiet that holds everything without effort. This is what Pilindavacha began to understand. That forgetting is not the opposite of knowing. Sometimes it is the doorway into remembering what cannot be named. So tonight, you don't have to hold on so tightly. You don't have to recite anything perfectly. You don't have to remember the exact teaching. You only have to listen to your breath, to the pause between thoughts, to the hush that fills the room like a bowl waiting to be filled with morning light. Even now the words are fading, not because they are unimportant, but because they've done their part. What remains is enough: the silence, the breath, the soft knowing inside you that no longer needs to be explained. You're not forgetting, you're arriving, like Pilindavacha, like the leaf that falls without sound, like the moon that rises without speaking. There was a gathering in the monastery courtyard. The monks had returned from their alms rounds robes, gently stained by the dust of the road bowls, now empty, their footsteps quiet, but full of presence. The sun stood high, casting soft golden light over the worn stones. The Sangha settled around the Buddha in a wide, calm circle like petals around the heart of a lotus. It was a day of recognition. Some monks had reached deep stages of meditative absorption. Others had mastered the Vinaya, the teachings, the chants. There was joy in the air, but also something quieter, expectation perhaps, a hope for acknowledgement. The Buddha closed his eyes, letting the silence gather around him like a second robe. When he opened them, he began to speak, not loudly, not ceremonially, but with the kind of voice that makes even the wind pause to listen. He named several monks, praised their insight, their generosity, their clarity in teaching others, and then softly, as if adding a single grain of rice to an already full bowl, he said, "Among those who persist, there is none more steady than Pilindavacha." The courtyard stilled. Some monks blinked, unsure they had heard correctly. Pilindavacha, the one who fumbled his verses, the one whose scrolls were worn not from study, but from so many attempts to grasp the same paragraph, the one who sat quietly in the backhands, folded mouth often closed. But the Buddha smiled as he spoke. "He is not swift," he said. "He is not sharp in words, but he has remained, and he has not let discouragement uproot him. That is strength beyond measure." Pilindavaka, seated as always near the edge of the gathering, bowed low. His cheeks warmed, not from pride, from humility. He had never expected to be named, because in his mind he was still learning, still beginning, still returning. But that was exactly what the Buddha was honoring. Not the flash of enlightenment, but the glow of steady effort. Not the clean lines of mastery, but the deep furrows of patience. Not the monk who always understood, but the one who never gave up trying. You feel something shift in yourself as you imagine this moment. Perhaps you too have waited to be seen, not for brilliance, but for trying, for enduring, for staying when it would have been easier to walk away. You recall times in your life when effort went unrecognized, when your slow steps were overlooked in a world rushing to the next milestone, when your quiet devotion was mistaken for lack of ambition. But here in the quiet courtyard of a monastery 2,000 years ago, the Buddha praised the slowest monk, and not as consolation, as truth, because the path of awakening is not a race. It is not a contest of minds or memories. It is a path walked with the heart, and hearts, as the Buddha knew, ripen in their own time. You picture Pilindavacha after the gathering. He does not strut. He does not linger for congratulations. He gathers his bowl, walks back toward the sala tree, and resumes his practice, not because he was praised, but because that is who he was: quiet, consistent, sincere. And now perhaps you understand something deeper, that being seen is not the goal. Being steady is. That recognition is not proof of worth. Presence is. And that the softest monks, the quietest listeners, the ones who trip over the verses and repeat the same chants for years, those are sometimes the ones who hold the Dharma most gently. You breathe slowly now, not to perform calm, but to feel it. Your chest rises, and you realize you are not trying anymore. You are simply here, with yourself, with the teachings, with the quiet truth that has always walked beside you. You do not need to be perfect. You do not need to be first. You need only to remain, to begin again, to sit where you are and trust that is enough. The Buddha sees that. He saw it in Pilindavacha. He sees it in you. It wasn't sudden. It didn't happen during a grand teaching or under the blaze of midday clarity or in the moment of a perfect meditation. It happened slowly, softly, so gradually that no one, not even Pilindavacha himself, could name the exact moment it occurred. But one morning the flower was open. That's how they described it later. The other monks said he changed, but not in the way that drew attention, not with dramatic insight or thunderous truth, not with poetry or preaching, just stillness, stillness that felt full. He had always been quiet, but now his silence felt different, grounded, like a deep lake with no ripples. His eyes held a kind of peace that didn't ask to be noticed, but couldn't be ignored. His presence soothed without speaking. His footsteps left no urgency in their wake. No announcement had been made. No light had appeared. No disciple had confirmed it. But the flower was open. It's said that awakening can come in many ways, some with flashes, others with fire. But for a few like Pilindavacha, it blooms in sleep. Not literal sleep, but the sleep of ego loosening, the sleep of trying less, the sleep of effort dissolving into surrender. He had spent so many years striving, trying to understand, trying to keep up, trying to remember the words. He had chased awakening like a distant bell he could never quite hear clearly. And then one day, without realizing, he stopped chasing. And when he did, something in him unfolded. You've felt this, haven't you? That strange sense that something inside you has shifted, not because of what you did, but because of what you stopped doing. Not because of what you achieved, but because of what you released. Maybe it was the moment you let go of needing to be right, or the moment you forgave yourself without fully knowing how, or the moment you stopped trying to fix what didn't need fixing. And in that moment, something subtle bloomed inside. Pilindavacha didn't tell anyone. He didn't declare attainment. He didn't try to teach. He simply lived with more ease. His breath softened. His chanting became effortless. His gaze met others, not with need, but with calm presence. He once told a novice who asked him how to know if awakening had arrived, "You won't. But others will feel it when they sit beside you." That's what the Buddha meant, perhaps, when he said awakening is not something to grasp, but something that reveals itself when the grasping ends. Imagine it a flower blooming at night when no one is watching, the petals slowly pushing open beneath moonlight, the fragrance drifting silently through the cool air. No ceremony, no witness, just the quiet certainty that it has bloomed, and this too is your path. It may not be bright, it may not be fast, it may not be visible to anyone but you, but it is blooming, even now. Maybe tonight you're sitting here wondering where your progress is, wondering why the stillness hasn't arrived yet, wondering if all your practice has added up to anything at all. But perhaps even as you wonder, the roots are growing. Perhaps while your thoughts wander, your heart is blooming in ways you cannot see. Pilindavacha once said, "A tree does not count its rings while it grows. It just stands and becomes." You are becoming, not by effort, not by speed, but by presence. One breath at a time, one failure forgiven, one return again and again. And one day, perhaps, when you least expect it, you'll realize that something inside you has shifted, that the flower has opened, not with noise, not with recognition, but with quiet grace, like Pilindavacha, like moonlight, like you right now. There are clocks, and then there is time, and then beyond both there is presence. Pilindavacha once sat with an elder monk who, noticing his gentle perseverance, asked him, "Do you ever feel regret for not learning faster, for not awakening sooner?" Pilindavacha looked up from the small pile of folded robes he was tending and replied simply, The Dharma does not wear a watch. The elder smiled, surprised by the clarity of the answer. It wasn't clever. It was true, because by then Pilindavacha had come to understand something rare, that the deepest things in life, truth, peace, awakening, do not arrive according to our schedule. They arrive when we stop measuring. He had let go of trying to catch up, let go of chasing milestones, let go of comparing his pace to others. And when he did, the tension dissolved. The inner tightness that said, "You're late, you're behind, you're not enough." It loosened like the final knot in a tangled cord. There was a kind of freedom in that, a vast, quiet freedom, because when you release the idea that you're supposed to have arrived by now, you begin to realize you're already here. That's the gift of timelessness. You begin to walk without pressure, sit without self-judgment, listen without grasping for meaning. You begin to trust that whatever moment you are in, it is enough. Pilindavacha's entire practice had once been colored by the belief that he was behind, that others had glimpsed something he hadn't, that he was always catching up to a teaching that kept floating just out of reach. But one evening, as he walked alone past the edge of the temple grounds, something changed. The light was low. A single lantern glowed in the window of a kuti. The scent of tamarind and ash lingered in the wind. He stopped, listened, and for the first time, the moment didn't feel like a doorway to something else. It felt complete, whole. He would later describe it as the first moment I didn't feel late. Not because he'd reached some milestone, not because he'd finally succeeded, but because he saw clearly time was never the problem. The teachings were not bound by minutes or years. They were not waiting ahead. They were alive in that moment, in the breath, the light, the sound of the insects singing their slow evening hymns. And so he stopped rushing. Not outwardly, he had never rushed much in the visible sense, but inwardly. The quiet chase ended. You may know that feeling too, the inner hurry. The voice that says, "By now I should have healed. By now I should have found peace. By now I should have changed." But what if peace doesn't care about by now? What if the teachings are not asking you to be ready by a certain date? What if the Dharma isn't a race course, but a field open, spacious, and forgiving? There's a passage from the Buddha often whispered during evening meditation. Even one who begins late, if they walk with care, will arrive. And it doesn't mean arriving at a prize. It means arriving in yourself. Pilindavacha became in time a mirror for those who struggled, the novice who felt too slow, the elder who feared they'd wasted their life, the layperson who only discovered practice in old age. They saw him and softened because he embodied something they didn't know was possible, that you could be slow and still be sincere, that you could be late and still be loved, that you could begin at any point and still belong. You return now to your own breath. The rhythm is quieter, the body more still, and there in the center of it all is the same invitation Pilindavacha once found. You are not too late, because there is no such thing. The Dharma does not shut its door after a certain hour. Awakening does not fade if you miss a step. Presence waits not ahead, not behind, but wherever you pause long enough to see it. You sit in that truth now like a lotus, resting in still water, whole, untimed, enough. There is a quiet truth that waits beneath all striving. It waits beneath the lists, beneath the missed chances, beneath the regrets you whisper to yourself in the dark. It does not raise its voice. It does not push you forward. It only waits for you to grow still enough to hear it. And it says, you were never late. You were always on time. Pilindavacha, after all his years of practice, did not finish first. He was not remembered for sharp insight or stunning words. He was remembered for how he stayed, for how he softened, for how he bloomed in silence. In his later years, he no longer needed to compare. His practice became gentler, simpler. He rose at the same hour each morning, not because of a schedule, but because his breath asked for stillness. He bowed before the Buddha's image, not to demonstrate piety, but because gratitude had become the shape of his spine. One morning, while sweeping the path slowly, as he did everything a young novice approached and asked him, "What if I never get it? What if I'm always a little behind?" Pilindavacha looked up the broom in his hands and smiled with a tenderness that had no urgency. He said, "Then you'll be just like me." And the boy laughed a little embarrassed. But Pilindavacha didn't laugh. He only said, "There's no behind. There's only walking." You sit with that now. You think about all the times you told yourself, "I should be further along." How many mornings you woke with a quiet ache of not being enough, not moving fast enough, not understanding deeply enough. And yet each of those mornings, you still breathed, you still cared, you still longed to return. That was never failure. That was practice. There's an old saying in the Sangha, the moment you return is the moment you arrive. And you have returned again and again, through distraction, through forgetfulness, through fatigue, through doubt. Each return was a bow. Each return was a beginning. Pilindavacha's life was a string of those beginnings. Not once did he turn away for long, even when confused, even when forgotten, even when the teachings seemed too complex, too distant, too impossible. He stayed, and in that staying he arrived. Not all at once, not in a blaze of insight, but like the sun rising through fog, softly, steadily warming everything. You too have warmed. Perhaps you didn't notice. Perhaps you were watching for lightning, waiting for fireworks. But while you waited, something quieter was happening. Your breath became more spacious. Your judgment began to soften. You sat with your own imperfections and did not flee. That is the sign of the path. Not perfection, not arrival, but presence that no longer needs to run. The Buddha near the end of his life once said, "Be a lamp unto yourself. Rely on no other refuge but the truth within you." Pilindavacha found that lamp not in study halls, but in small acts sitting under trees when he could not chant, returning to the cushion when his thoughts raced, forgiving himself for learning slowly, and letting each moment, no matter how small, become sacred. You feel that now. The softness in your breath, the stillness behind your eyes, the sense that you are no longer waiting to begin because you already have. The path is not somewhere you go, it's something you become, and you have become it in your own way, in your own rhythm, at your own time, exactly as you were meant to. So tonight, as your thoughts begin to fade and your body grows heavy with rest, let this truth wrap around you like a blanket. You are always on time. There is nothing left to prove. There is only this breath, and it is enough. Now the story has settled. The temple is quiet. The chants have faded. The trees have gone still. Even the stars seem to blink more slowly. You are here not as someone racing toward peace, but as someone who has finally let peace catch up. There is nothing more you need to do tonight, nothing more to understand. The teachings have done their work, not through explanation, but through presence, through soft repetition, through the way your breath has slowed and your shoulders have softened and your thoughts no longer press forward with urgency. This is the gift Pilindavacha left behind, not a scroll, not a verse, but a rhythm, a way of being in the world that does not demand arrival, a way of walking that honors the pauses, a way of listening that welcomes the silence between words. And so you rest now, not because you're exhausted, but because you finally believe it is okay to rest. The path is still here. It has not moved on without you. It walks at your pace. It waits when you stop. It carries you when you cannot carry yourself. Even now, as you close your eyes, or let them remain half open, softened by stillness, you are not missing anything. You are not late. You are not behind. You are not broken. You are here, and that is enough. Let your breath become slower. Let it move like wind over tall grass, unforced, directionless, free. Let the thoughts fade like ripples in a pond after the stone has settled. Let the body become weightless. Let the day dissolve. There is nowhere else to be. There is no one else to become. The teachings are within you now, not as knowledge, but as quiet knowing, as calm breath, as softened gaze, as gentle faith in the pace of your own becoming. If sleep comes welcome, it like a friend arriving late without apology. If it delays rest anyway, because stillness too is a form of awakening. Pilindavacha would tell you this if he could sit beside you now. You're already walking the path, even when you rest. So rest, dear one. The moon keeps watch, the Dharma holds you, and the next breath will find you just as you are, softly, gently, perfectly on time.